Welcome to Dev Diary, the series where I try to make my own video games, and boy did I make a video game. Now to truly experience this one, we're just gonna have to get right into the project. Now, there's a lot happening in this screen, so let's start with the left area first. This is where most of the action happens, and it is indeed inspired by those old school dungeon crawlers. And believe it or not, this is a 3D space. I'd move the camera to prove it, but trust when I say this thing is barely hanging on as is, because this was a last-minute implementation. See, gamemaker has this function that allows a sprite to be skewed and distorted. What isn't made obvious or really explained up front is that due to a long and technical reason, the results are often a broken and generally unusable mess. So the original plan was to fake a 3D room by skewing a few sprites using that gamemaker function. And a few days of research later, it was clear that the easiest way to accomplish the goal was to simply make a 3D space. And thus, our dungeon was finally built. So what we've got here is essentially a 3D box with the sides of that box reflecting where the player is on the map, which can be seen at the top right. Now, unexpected visual issues aside, this game is much more than just a dungeon crawler. It's also a mashup of Dark Souls and Punch-Out! Indeed, the combat of this game is inspired by the old classic. Now, different enemies have different attack patterns. For example, the knight here has two different attacks: a heavy horizontal swing, which does a lot of damage, and a second attack, which are two vertical strikes. Now, they are weaker in damage, but are faster in their execution. Now, these attacks can appear in one of three locations, and it's up to the player to dodge to the left or dodge to the right, block the attack in general, or of course go on the offensive with their own attack. But like in Punch-Out, once an action is taken, they are committed to it. So, it becomes this game of knowing when to strike and, when to evade or when to block. And physical attacks are just one of two types of attacks in this game. Now, these big-eyed little lizard-like things have a normal strike attack, but they also have a poison gas attack. Now, if the player is caught in this attack, even if blocking, they will be poisoned. And being poisoned means that the player will take damage every 5 seconds. Their poison counter can be kept track of at the top right of the screen, and indeed, poison will stack. Now, players can cure poison with an antidote, which is just one of the few pieces of loot that the player can find. And for the sake of scope, there are really only 4 pieces of loot, including souls collected for each enemy defeated, and that loot includes an antidote, which will cure the player of all remaining poison stacks, a health potion, which does exactly as one would expect, and the final piece of loot that can be found is trash. Good old trash. Now we'll get to that one in a bit, but potions can be used at any time in or out of combat by clicking their respective buttons on the diamond-shaped menu to the right, left for health and right for poison. The top is the player's soul count, and the bottom is the trash count. And before we move on, a fun little feature included is that antidotes are used automatically if the player is poisoned in combat. And honestly, as nice as I think it is, I don't actually know if that would be considered a good design decision. Anyway, one of the many things that the player can find in these dungeons are potion sellers. They will not only sell their wares for 10 souls a pop, but they will also buy any trash the player has upon visiting them. The twist, however, is that a merchant will vanish from the dungeon once their wares are completely sold out, meaning as desperate as the player may be to buy out a merchant's stock, it actually pays, literally, to keep them around in case of looting a ton of trash. Now, loot itself can be found in these treasure chests scattered amongst the many rooms in our randomly generated dungeons. However, players will want to pay attention because there are mimics, and opening a mimic chest will lock the player into combat. Now, luckily, mimics only have one attack, but you ever been bit by a mimic? Oh, it hurts. Now really, the goal of the entire game is just to dungeon crawl to the player's content. Once a bonfire is discovered, the player can leave at any time, which simply resets the level to generate a new dungeon to be explored, which is basically the gameplay loop. Now, I will say, I knew going into this one that the animation for this project would be near impossible, simply due to time constraints. But I also gotta say that the scope on this one was dialed way back due to the whole 3D thing explained earlier. No joke, I legit did like half this project with it looking like this, while I figured out the best way to actually achieve the visuals. And even then, it was such a last minute hack job that even the visuals were scaled way back. But speaking of the visuals, I love the combo of like hand-drawn pixel art with like a dithered monochrome aesthetic, Like this is using the same shader used in a previous project, which allows for that cool fade-in effect seen in the level transitions and the death scene. I still haven't figured out a few of the remaining visual bugs though. Anyway, I legitimately think that this was a great mashup and one I would love to give proper time and effort to, which would require an entire rewrite of the code unfortunately, but I think it'd be worth it, especially if more Souls-like influence could also be added to the pile. But what do you think? Do you think it's a good combo and one that you would play? What other features from either the Dungeon Crawler, Punch-Out, or Soul series do you think should be added next? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. While you're at it, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, and if you'd like to support the channel further, I am on Patreon. And finally, why not subscribe if you're new to the channel? With that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.